Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be getting back into our ongoing retrospective on Spawn with Spawn number 21. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in May of 1994, keep in mind that originally issue number 21 came out directly after issue 18 because of a big mistake that Todd made in the print scheduling, apparently. Also, that brings me to another point. I have to apologize to everyone because I made a mistake. If you watched my video on, I think, Spawn number 16, I brought this up. I was under the impression that Greg Capullo took over the primary penciling duties full-time for Spawn starting with issue number 16, when in fact he penciled issues number 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, and then Todd penciled issues 21 through 25, and then Greg actually took over full-time penciling issues number 26 through 100. Serves me right for trying to go completely off of memory on some books I haven't read for at least 15 years. And maybe if I just took a little bit more time to do the actual research, I wouldn't make those kinds of mistakes. But hey, we live and we learn, and everybody has to, get better, do better. I'll try my best. We can see here that the cover is actually really cool. It's kind of minimalist in the sense that there's no real background to it, but I really like how the white just draws your attention directly into, the little half portrait of Spawn coming out from like a, strange little cutout type of panel. It's different, but it's unique. I also really like the way his chain kind of hangs over here on the side where it's kind of like popping in front of the panel. It's minimalist, but I think it does a great job. It's a really unique cover, and I like it. Story and art, Todd McFarlane. Inks, Mark Pennington. Copy editor and letterer, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. And I would like to point out, even though I don't normally, that this book in particular was dedicated to Mike Grell, which further supports my theory that Mike Grell was ousted by some of the Image founders, but that Todd was not one of the people that voted to do this. Todd kind of inferred that in the letter section of some other issues of Spawn, but this kind of really drives home the point that he wanted Mike Grell to stay when he was overruled by some of the other creators. We still don't know exactly why all of that went down, and I've not noticed any information that I can find about explaining why Mike Grell was ousted at Image, but it doesn't seem like it was particularly a unanimous thing where like everybody wanted him gone. No, there were some people that wanted him to stay, and I think this was kind of like the first cracks in the armor showing in the Image hierarchy at this time. Getting into the story, we're overhearing a conversation between Spawn and Bobby as we see each panel zooming in closer from the night sky to the city skyline to an alleyway to a finger holding a shoelace as Spawn is trying to deal with an injury that he suffered in issue number 20 where he was shot in the face. However, the people reading this book originally when it first came out would not have known that because issues 19 and 20 hadn't been printed yet. But at any rate, Bobby's just kind of scolding Spawn for being a big baby, as he puts it, and tells Spawn that he needs to toughen up. We then see that Bobby was doing a real hack job sewing Spawn's face back together, especially when we think about the fact that, here in the future, we know that the Image Spawn sustained was basically being shot in the face between the eyes for the most part, but the wound didn't travel all the way down into his chin, and it especially didn't travel off to the right side of his mouth, which are also sewn up. And, Bobby didn't exactly do the, straightest, cleanest job of sewing up this wound, as he asks Spawn how he came into this injury, and Spawn just mentions that he ran into some bozo. That, of course, is in reference to Harry Houdini and the entire storyline that went there, and it is given a little blurb box down here stating that, see issues 19 and 20 not out yet, which is such a hilarious way to go about that. As we see Bobby inspecting his work, he says that he does a great job, or that he did a great job, and that he loves it, and that Big Bobby saves the day once again. and then wonders why Spawn had him even sew it up in the first place, as the way Bobby puts it, his hamburger face wasn't exactly winning any beauty contests to begin with, to which Spawn sarcastically says, "Gee, thanks." And then Bobby tells him to cheer up, that, overall he did a great job, and the best part is he didn't even have to use his own shoelace for this terrible surgery, as he was able to steal a shoe from one of the guys who lived in an alleyway a few blocks away. Bobby then asks Spawn what could possibly be better than all that, and Spawn responds his life, as he goes into a long explanation telling Bobby all of the things that have gone wrong, from having to deal with being lied to and tricked, and then also having to deal with all of the different villains and freaks that he's been having to fight since he returned to the world of the living. And then he tells Bobby that he was just that his whole goal was to just try and come back to his wife, to which Bobby actually has a pretty good understanding of, as we find out now that the reason Bobby's homeless is because his wife died from cancer many years back, and he just couldn't deal with it, especially because the doctors talked him into pulling the plug when she was clinically brain dead. And despite the fact that she had no hope of recovering from the illness, he still blamed himself for her death, and, just couldn't get over the grief, and, lost himself in the bottom of a bottle to the point where he quit going to work and lost all of his money and wound up living on the streets. And that, he essentially is just kind of content with the life that he's made for him now, where he's just, a homeless guy who's, dealing with alcoholism on a day-to-day. But then he also tells Spawn that, he's not dealing with his problems very well at all, and that he and the rest of the men living in the alleyways basically rely on Spawn, not only as their protector, but as also their inspiration. And, he's really got to be able to get himself together and essentially be their leader. And Spawn realizes now, after hearing Bobby give this speech, that, there is a lot more going on around him that he was, aware of. And, he didn't understand exactly how much he meant to all these other guys as, their de facto leader and protector, and that he's got to make some changes to be there for the people who count on him now. As Spawn puts his mask back on, he thanks Bobby for the pep talk and tells him that he's got to go and get his life back in order and start taking control of the situations around him. And as he leaves, Bobby just thinks to himself, man, that guy sure is awesome. He's so cool, which is just kind of a funny way of explaining Bobby's personality of this happy-go-lucky guy, but also a guy who's, really in awe of this caped, superhero dude that suddenly is living amongst him and the other homeless guys in the alley. And we are then teleported to another part of the city where Jason Wynn is furious, as he's being given a report by his underlings that they can't find any reason to keep tailing Terry Fitzgerald. This brings us back to the story point that Wynn believed, or still believes, that Terry Fitzgerald is the one who is responsible for taking the documents that Spawn actually took, as he has no idea that Al Simmons has returned from the grave. And he's in a really precarious predicament right now, as Wynn had disappeared for multiple days when he was kidnapped by the Angels and turned into the anti-Spawn, and he has no way of explaining his disappearance to all of his superiors in the military and the government. And now he's got a lot of high-level government officials kind of breathing down his neck, trying to figure out what was going on, where he was during that time, wanting answers that he doesn't have. And he's also having to deal with the fact that he was 100% wrong about his inclinations regarding Terry Fitzgerald. However, he can't allow that knowledge to become public, so he has to double down at this point. He tells the men to keep trailing Terry, to keep putting the screws to him, and to not let up until they find what they're looking for, because he absolutely needs Terry to be the mole at this point to basically convince the people that he answers to that he's still got what it takes to be in charge of this organization. After receiving Wynn's orders, and despite having no actual evidence to back up any of the accusations, they then go to Terry's office to confront him directly. After barging into his office and pushing their way past his secretary, They say that, they're going to do whatever it takes to find the evidence that they need to pin all of this on Terry, and that Terry should just confess to his crimes. Terry at this point is getting used to the threats and seems unamused. They also then threaten that if they don't find the evidence they need to pin this on him, they'll certainly find something else that they can pin on him. And that, Terry's never going to get away with this, and that no matter what he does, he's going to wind up going away for some sort of crime. They then tell him to answer his ringing phone, which of course is none other than his wife, Wanda, who is just asking about, the date that they have planned tonight and, telling him a story about their daughter. She then realizes that he was talking to some other people and asks if he was in a meeting. He says he was, but it was nothing important, as the other two men leave and once again leave a not so thinly veiled threat that they're going to do whatever it takes to nail Terry to the wall. Elsewhere in the city, we see detectives Sam and Twitch are in the middle of I guess you'd call it interrogation, as they have found a drug dealer who they are beating the piss out of to get information regarding Spawn, who they don't know the name of yet. They're only searching for a shadowy figure in a red cape that they've run across on multiple occasions now, and are convinced that he's at the heart of something bigger regarding the crime in New York. The man states that, they're guilty of police brutality, but Sam and Twitch at this point are not worried about anything that he says, given that this man is a known drug dealer with a list of convictions a mile long, and that, he's also got a pound of cocaine in the trunk of his car, and they've caught him multiple times selling drugs to high school students. And the man says, I don't know anything about any guy wearing a red cape, but Sam tells him that, while that may be true, he, is willing to look the other way and just take the drugs from the man and tell him to scram to another territory if the man can find out anything about the red-caped figure within the next 48 hours. The man once again tries to mouth off, but Sam wastes no time in stomping directly on his hand, which puts the guy into overdrive, and realizing that he needs to go find some information ASAP if he wants to, 1, stay on the streets, and 2, stay in one piece. Later on, back in the alleyways that Spawn calls home, Spawn is awoken by another member of the group of homeless men who tells him that there's some, jacked up Nazi skinhead who's going around shaking down some of the guys in the alleyway trying to get information about Spawn and where he can find him. Spawn believes that this is just some other idiot who's trying to make a name for himself, some wannabe gangster who wants to take him on and act as if he's some sort of big shot for fighting on or taking on the protector of, the alleyways and all these men. As he zooms across the city, he is able to quickly locate the man as he is in the middle of trying to shake down one of the homeless guys in the alleyway and, really threatening to beat the guy up and stating that he doesn't care, who this guy is. He must be some kind of psycho if he thinks he's going to stand up to him. Obviously, he has no idea what he's dealing with, but he's about to find out. Spawn then sneaks up behind the man, and for the first time that we see in any of these comics, he uses the obvious claws that he's drawn with as actual claws and grabs the man in the meat of his arm, digging his claws all the way into the bone like a tiger. The man screams out in pain, and Spawn says that he'd like a minute of the man's time as he lifts him up into the air simply by gripping into his arm, and states that he wants to know who sent this guy. The man remains defiant, stating that, Spawn doesn't know who he's dealing with, and Spawn says, "You took the words right out of my mouth," as he throws the man across the alleyway into some garbage cans and a brick wall. The man still remains defiant, stating that, Spawn doesn't know who he's dealing with, and that, he's screwing with the wrong people, and that, they're going to kill him, and eventually states that Spawn's dead meat, as we see Spawn grab his mask in a moment of defiance and anger to show the man exactly what he's looking at. We then see this amazing full-page splash of Spawn ripping his mask off, saying, "You're damn right I am," in reference to the dead meat comment, showing the man his face. This is such a good illustration. I freaking love this, man. And he then gets in the man's face, stating that, "I don't care who you work for, they can't possibly do worse to me than has already been done." He then once again demands to know who the man is working for, and he finally relinquishes the information that it's Tony Twist. And Spawn is not impressed at all and just states, "You go back and tell that fat ass boss of yours that I'm not going to take his crap anymore, and that if he thinks he can do worse to me to come and bring it, I'll be waiting." But then he tells him that, Twist needs to hurry up because otherwise he'll be paying him a visit again, as we see the man's eyes go wide as he realizes that he's definitely in over his head at this point, and simply just states to Spawn, "Holy crap, man, you're crazy." Spawn then simply states it helps as he backhands the man while leaving the alleyway. The man, of course, defeated as he never really stood a chance against Spawn in the first place. We then are teleported later in the evening to the office of one Mr. Tony Twist as we see the man all battered and bruised giving his report to Tony. Tony realizes that it's just another costume superhero trying to make a name for himself, or at least that's what he thinks. And then, for his troubles, he fires the man on the spot, which is kind of hilarious that he just received the beating of a lifetime and now he's out of a job on top of it. The man leaves the office and slams the door. And we are then privy to a conversation between Tony and one of his top associates, who is faceless and nameless at this point, discussing the issues at hand. They're trying to get Overkill rebuilt so that he can be used to once again try and confront Spawn. They, of course, don't know his name yet, but Tony has been confronted directly once already by Spawn, as we saw earlier in the series. And Tony's starting to get a little bit upset about all of the, perceived threats to his power in New York City. Also, the murders that were carried out by the Violator. They, of course, are sure that he's the one who carried them out, but only by knowing his clown form, not his monstrous demon form. So they want to hunt down this clown killer and are deciding to bring in the help of the Admonisher. These, of course, are all the events that take place in the Violator miniseries. If you haven't watched my episodes on the Violator miniseries, feel free to do so. I suggest you do so, as it makes this part of the story make a little bit more sense. And if you'd like to, they're all in my Spawn miniseries playlist. It's a great miniseries. I love it. It's a super fun time of like this dark and, violent comedy. It's a blast to read, and I can't say enough good things about that miniseries. I really do enjoy that one. And we also find out that the man who is reporting to Tony here has done some digging and found that the weapons that Tony described to him that Spawn was carrying and used to defeat Overt Kill are of a very high level of government tech that not just anyone would be able to get their hands on. And after doing some digging, he found out about the investigation that Jason Wynn is heading up against Terry Fitzgerald. So they put two and two together and decide that Terry Fitzgerald might be working with Spawn and potentially is the one who got the weapons for him. So at this point, Tony is now also after Terry Fitzgerald, and Terry's life is just in a tailspin at this point because everyone is blaming him for the actions of Spawn. And Tony is once again trying to, settle any dispute about who he is and, his level of authority in New York City. So he decides that he's going to be going after Tony as well. And, Tony's life is really between a rock and a hard place at this point, and it's pretty much all Al's fault or Spawn's fault. So it's just a rough day for Terry Fitzgerald, man. We then see Tony basically reach his boiling point as he states that, he's really getting tired of all of these, threats and challenges to his leadership in the New York crime syndicates, and states that, heroes, demons, clowns, capes, it doesn't matter. Everyone's going to know by, his actions that he's the one who runs the show and that he will not tolerate dissent. We then see the familiar news reports. Once again, apparently Todd has made it all the way to issue number 21 of Spawn without being given a cease and desist by either CNN or the E! Entertainment Network for using their copyrighted trademarked logos in his comic books, as the reports are all about Jason Wynn and, the controversy surrounding him and his disappearance. And also the fact that, despite him being high-level intelligence and, working on a lot of really secretive stuff, he's back on the job with there being no information given by him or anyone else regarding his disappearance. This, of course, infuriates our old pal Thurston Burns, who is stating that this is because it's an old boys club and they're just covering for Wynn. But, if Wynn disappeared for that long, what national security secrets might he have divulged during his disappearance? Which is a valid criticism. Most of the time, Thurston's a bit of a blowhard and a firebrand, but every once in a while, he makes a valid point that, hey, maybe we shouldn't allow this guy who just disappeared for 2 days and has given no explanation as to where he was, his job back in the middle of one of the highest level intelligence agencies in the country. On the final page of the story, we see that Thurston continues his report and stating that he hopes there's somebody with enough guts out there to stand up and fight back against, all the evils that are, facing the city of New York. As we see that all of Spawn's enemies are basically closing in around him, as we see Wynn, Twist, and a newly rebuilt Overkill pictured up in the corner as Spawn is sitting lonely in his alleyways, potentially falling asleep, not realizing the danger that he's going to have to face. We then get to the spawning ground where we have a box right here stating attention, trying to once again explain the whole mistake with issue 21 coming out before issues 19 and 20, and not really giving any explanation as to why it happened, but once again, they didn't really go deep into that explanation. We then get into the spawning grounds letter section, where I found one letter to be particularly interesting. It's a group of people who wrote a letter in from, well, it's one in particular person writing on behalf of a group of people from the UK, complaining that they didn't feel that Image Comics had enough black characters represented in the book, or in their books. And they only bring up a few characters at this point, namely Spawn and Chapel, and, stating that there's not really a whole lot of other ones. But I find it odd that they brought up Chapel in Youngblood, but then ignored Sentinel, who's also in Youngblood and black. And then they also ignored the fact that Ballistic, the leader of Stormwatch, is black. And, it's just kind of odd that they seem to really overlook a few others. And also, and I understand this was 1994 and it was people maybe being ignorant of, offensive terminology. One of the things he does say is that, most of the characters in Image's books either seem to be white or, as he puts it, Orientals, which it is kind of, cringy that he's complaining about a lack of representation of one race while using a very offensive term to describe another. But again, this was, 30 years ago, and I'm just going to assume that the guy writing this article or writing this letter in was just ignorant of the fact that that term was offensive and wasn't trying to actually be racist. But it's just one of those things that didn't really age well. And like I said, the crux of his argument was a little off, as he wasn't exactly listing all of the other African-American characters that existed in the pages of Image. And, I understand the complaint, but at the same time, I feel like Image actually did a pretty good job of representing a lot of different racial groups and nationalities. Shaman's Tears, which had just recently been canceled, was dealing with, Americans, or the Americas, First Nations, tribal people as main characters. And you also had a lot of different races represented throughout Stormwatch, as Stormwatch was an international organization headed up by the UN. So there were all different types of people from all different parts of the world represented in that. So, I mean, I understand your focus on one particular race as maybe you are of that same race. But if you look at the broader picture, I feel like Image was actually doing a pretty good job of trying to represent a lot of other racial groups. And, for his criticism of, overrepresentation of Asians, I actually think that a lot of Southeast Asian people being, main characters in Image books was a little bit groundbreaking for the time. I mean, obviously, characters such as that did exist within the pages of Marvel and DC as well, but not to the same extent that they did in the pages of Image. And it probably didn't hurt that Jim Lee was one of the founders of Image, and he himself, being of Asian descent, would have been more likely to, introduce a lot of Southeast Asian characters. Overall, it just felt like the letter fell a little flat. I understand the point the guy was trying to make, but at certain points it seemed a little tone deaf. We then see the second page of the spawning grounds. They were basically just the same old type of letters. And of course, image info, which never really changes. It is just a blurb about upcoming books. Nothing special to see here. It's things we've seen dozens of times at this point. We then get two pinups submitted by one John Clary and Sterling Clark. These are both really cool. I like this one with, Spawn being all wild and crazy with the energy coming out of his eyes, the big giant violator face on the side. This one over here is kind of cool too. I like how, Spawn's leaping into the air as if he's fighting against the Mabalja and also the Violator, but the Violator's in his clown form, so he's not really ready for battle. And we also see Wanda pictured in both of these, which I find unique. She doesn't actually get featured in a lot of these pinups, so it was kind of cool to see her show up. We then get a lot of Violator fan art. As I stated, the Violator miniseries was coming out around this time, so it makes sense that they were trying to promote that by also publishing all of the fan-submitted Violator artwork. It is kind of cool that they got all this stuff in here, and, I would have still love to have had some kind of artwork published in, a nationally syndicated comic book. I think that's pretty cool that they were doing this stuff at that time, especially in full color. That was, money that they didn't have to spend, but were choosing to. And, I give them credit for doing so. We then get a giant 2-page ad for Youngblood number 6. I have not reached issue number 6 yet in my Youngblood series. However, if you would like to know more about Youngblood, feel free to check out my Youngblood playlist. On the final page of the issue, we get an advertisement for Wizard number 36, which also advertises a contest to potentially win a Mortal Kombat 2 cabinet, which would have been pretty awesome in 1994. You'd have been hard-pressed to find someone who was not excited about winning one of these machines back then. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for New Men number 4. I have not done any videos about New Men as of the recording of this video. I plan to at some point in the future when I have more issues of this comic. Right now, I'm really light on issues of New Men and am kind of scouring some dollar boxes to try and find more issues of it. Hopefully that doesn't take me too long, and hopefully it doesn't cost too much, so that I can start talking about New Men along with all the other things that I've got on a long list of books I want to talk about. And that was Spawn number 21. All in all, I think this was a pretty good issue. The thing I like about it the most is not so much the stuff that Spawn's doing and him kind of trying to turn the corner in being less depressed about the way that things are working out for him and focusing more on trying to make changes, which, don't get me wrong, I like that story point. What I really like about this book is the fact that it's taking time to show all of the subplots that are going on around Spawn that he's not necessarily aware of, and showing how many things are, at work to try and derail him, derail people he cares about. And, it really kind of makes you understand what he's up against in terms of trying to accomplish his goals, but also protect the people that he cares about. And, despite the fact that he has so much power, he really is powerless in many circumstances because there's so many things going on that are outside of his control. I think it's a really cool way of, humanizing Spawn in, creating danger for the people around him, since he himself, isn't vulnerable to a lot of those types of danger. But then again, these are just my opinions. You may not agree, and if not, that's okay, because everyone is entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.